science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction. Fiction. Fiction.
Smooth salutation, Cocknodox. Welcome to X or Fathom. I am Mike, and joined always with my two lovely co-hosts, Nick and Ayla. How's the Monday going?
Hey, happy Monday. I'm doing all right. How are you?
It's been a strange day, but a good kind of strange day. So I can't complain.
Yeah, better than good, bad strange, I would suppose.
Yeah, you can say that.
Definitely.
Ayla, how you doing?
I'm hanging in there. Yeah, I think, is that like just what you say, or is that what the third person says?
I think that's what I say, but
Today
was a day of exception, so different.
That makes sense. Yeah, there was something in the air today, and it rained here in LA, which I was surprised by.
Yeah, for all of 2 seconds.
Yeah, for 2 seconds, I know. But, just give it a minute and we'll be just covered in smoke soon. Oh, my God. I'm worried about the fires.
Well, you still have a few more months away from that, so you don't have to worry right now. Just jump off that bridge when it comes. Not right now.
Fair enough.
Yep. So today I wanted to get into some David and Goliath stuff, but my first question is, how familiar are you with the story?
I mean, semi-familiar. I think I remember I used to go to church as a kid, so I think I remember the stories in the youth group that I was in. So, I mean, I remember loosely the ideas, but probably not like the details of like who else was involved, the politics surrounding it, that type of stuff.
Okay. Ayla?
Well, yeah, I didn't know you actually went to church. I did not, but I had a friend that went to church, and I slept over at her house, and her mom dragged me to their Bible study group, which ended up being kind of fun because they watched this thing called Veggie Tales, and it's where all these like vegetables reenact stories from the Bible.
Yep.
So I think it was a David and Goliath Veggie Tale. But aside from being distracted by the fact that they were talking cute vegetables, I did not retain much. I know that it's the story of like the underdog, and I'm a big fan of underdog stories. So I think that should be pretty fun.
Cool. Well, am I the only one that got weirded out about Veggie Tales? That it was a bunch of vegetables? Like, I was so distracted by it.
I mean, I watched it the one time, so I think it was still pretty novel, but I don't know. Were they really creepy or something like that?
I don't know. Maybe some uncanny valley stuff was going on, but there's just something unsettling about.
The animation was very strange.
Yeah, I don't. Anyways.
Oh, their eyes. Yeah, they had really like intense eyes. I'm looking at some images now.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm happy I didn't see too many of those, or else I think it would be burned into my memory forever. Cool. So then I guess I can just run over the story really fast, right? So You have these two sides, the Israelites and the Philistines, and they have been warring for thousands of years. I can get into kind of like the kings, at least the kings of the Israelites become more important, but they meet down in a valley. And basically, the Philistines are waiting for the Israelites to engage them in battle. But there's this guy, this champion that the Philistines have known as Goliath. And he's like a 9-foot man, just this insane beast of a human being. And so the soldiers are just utterly terrified. The Israelite soldiers are utterly terrified of battle. So they're trying to figure out how they can contend with not only this army, but this Goliath of a man. And they assume that their king Saul, who I guess by divine right in a way, in a false kind of way, is king. But that gets more into like the religious side of it. They expect him to fight because he's the tallest man in Israel. But Goliath is bigger than him, so he's kind of afraid to take him on. So there's a period for 40 days where Goliath comes out and kind of mocks the Israelites, denounces their God, uh, just sort of makes fun of them, I guess, bullies them. It would be now the term to say nowadays, and even throws out an ultimatum of like, we don't have to go to war. Just send me one of your soldiers and we'll fight one on one. And if you win, our armies will become your armies. You can take us as, servants. But if I win, your kingdom becomes part of the Philistine kingdom. And so instead of, kind of taking some sort of making it easier for the Israelites, they end up becoming more afraid because they can't stand unified against Goliath. Somebody has to fight them. And again, they look towards Saul. But Saul doesn't want to go. He's just a king in hiding, even if he has all his, battle armor on and is ready to fight. So in comes David, the shepherd, and pretty much a boy at the time. And what he was doing was delivering food to his brothers who served in the army. But Saul had said that if anybody can take on and kill Goliath, they would be able to marry his daughter and live in the state of Israel tax-free, pretty much. And David, hearing this, decides to go into battle. Saul kind of mocks him, tells him that, there's no way, you're just a boy. You can't take on this beast, or as we were talking about earlier in the show, the mountain-esque, you can't fight this guy. He's just too big. And David at the time was a shepherd of his father's flock of sheep. And he tells Saul that he can fight him because apparently David had already killed a bear, killed a lion, that were trying to, at several times tried to kill the flock of sheep that he was watching over. So apparently David is kind of a badass already. And Saul is convinced to let him fight. So Saul gives him his armor, gives him his sword, gives him everything. But this stuff is so big for David that he can't really move around in it. And so he just takes off all the armor and he says, I don't need any of this. And instead picks up 5 stones from a nearby stream and walks out and goes to confront Goliath. Even Goliath is like, this is a joke. You're going to send a boy to try to fight me. I think he even says something about, like, do you think I'm a dog? You're just going to hit me with sticks or something like that. You don't even have the garb to fight. And even mocks him further by saying he'll feed his remains to the animals once he's done. But eventually David gets him to fight. So as this battle happens, if you will, David, if you want to call it that, David puts a stone into his slingshot and whirls it around and throws it at such a speed that the stone hits Goliath in the head, sinks into his skull, and kills him for the most part, knocks him out. And the Philistines are standing there in shock and awe, as I would imagine the Israelites are, cheering, going nuts. David walks over and decapitates Goliath as he's lying there on the ground. And with a sight of, savagery going on, the Philistines freak out, turn around, and run and retreat. But sadly for them, I guess, the Israelites chase them back into their camps, sack the camps, and slaughter all the soldiers. And that's sort of the story. And it is I guess, an underdog tale, but you can also look at it as a tale of luck, right? That in a way, because like David didn't go until he heard about the reward. This is where you get into arguments over whether he's not working in God's plan, if you want to take a real biblical look at it. Because he was doing it out of selfishness he was risking his life to better his own life, some say. And whether or not he had complete trust in God, because he had to use 5 stones, is also another thing of debate that we can get into. But for the most part, it's the idea that as long as you have faith in God or yourself, you can overcome any sort of adversity. So yeah, in that sense, it would be an underdog tale, and that's sort of like the quick gist of the story. We cool? Or thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some things I wrote down here. I think there's a significance to 40 days within the Judeo religious structure, and I'm not exactly sure what that is, so I'll have to look into that because 40 days pops up in the Bible quite often. And I wonder if there's some sort of missing translation that 40 days means something else than 40 days, because it seems as though it's used really frequently in the Bible. So I'm wondering if it's a different unit of measurement entirely.
Maybe was the flood 40 days?
Yeah, 40 days, 40 nights. Yeah, there's a couple other references to like the number 40 as well.
Well, according to Google, 40 days was the period from the resurrection of Jesus to the ascension of Jesus. And then according to Stephen, there's no last name. I don't know who Stephen is, but Moses's life is divided into 3 40-year segments, separated by his growing into adulthood, fleeing from Egypt, and then returning to his people. What? He was 120? He lived to be 120? That's not right.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely have an episode about the lengths of time that people lived back then, because there's a lot of people that apparently lived for hundreds of years. So
Hundreds of years.
Oh yeah.
I think someone might have been lying there.
Maybe.
Well, now I'm curious, do either of you know what ternary means as like a mathematical term?
Threes.
Trinary. Oh yeah.
No, it's ternary.
Okay.
Ternary. Well, it's just weird because they have cardinal 40, the divisors 1, 2, 4, 5, 8, 10, 20, 40. The factorization is 2 to the third times 5. And the ternary is 11, 11 sub 3, which I thought was kind of interesting because you've got the Holy Trinity, and then everybody's like, goes crazy over 1, 1, 1, 1.
1, 1. Yeah.
One more one. Yeah.
I'm sure there's a significance in the story. So, or significance with that number. Yeah. Anything else though? Because there are a few kind of like, I do want to get into David and Saul kind of a bit, and I do want to get into the notion of the slingshot over like, picking up the sword. I think the dropping of the armor is kind of self-evident, like having that sort of faith to go up against anything, because all the Israelites saw Goliath as this beast, this monster, so they had a kind of set of fear in them. David walked with the Lord, so only saw him as what he was a man, as another one of God's creations. So that kind of gave him the edge in battle, if you will, that fearlessness to go out and I don't know, sling a rock, and so fast that it was like a proper headshot.
Yeah. Well, I think I don't know if this is the first documentation of projectile weapon, but it's certainly one of the first. But yeah, I think it's interesting. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second there.
Well, I can tell you where my mind went. I'm looking at pictures of David and Goliath, and I'm just thinking about, there's this game on the Nintendo Switch, and it's the Legend of Zelda. And there's these like Goliath-like creatures that you have to defeat. They're really big, but you have to hit them like 300 times. So I'm a little skeptical, like just one slingshot and this guy goes down. That's wild. Has this guy fought in other fights before? Did you mention that?
No,
or did he just like, huh?
David? Well, he fought animals. So he fought a lion and he fought a bear and killed him with a sword in his hand. Goliath
or David?
David. Goliath was a soldier, was like their best soldier. So he probably took... Yeah, but he took David a bit lightly as well, even going as far as taking off his helmet before fighting David.
I see. Yeah, so that's like his hubris. He underestimated David.
Well, it's also the underdog tends to think outside of the box, I think, as well. So they always tend to do something that's kind of outside of the convention. David wasn't able to meet Goliath in the same sort of terms that everybody else did. Soldiers geared up, carrying heavy swords, wearing heavy armor. So the underdog, tries to utilize what's best at their disposal in order to rise up.
Yep. In the biblical sense, it'd be kind of like using the gifts that God gave you to overcome these problems rather than gifts that another man gave you. Because Saul does give him his tunic, he does give him his armor, tunic his armor, gives him his armor, gives him his sword, and kind of gives him everything that Saul would wear, but it's no use to David. David just goes with what he always used to kind of fight this stuff or fight the animals with a slingshot and his own sword. But yeah, no, that sort of outside the box, unconventional thinking. It might be one of the first cases of guerrilla warfare as well.
Right. Yeah, because, psychological warfare too.
Yeah, because like it was the like he takes out one guy and the entire army flees the battleground. And going further down the line now, like our special operations, they believe just a few people in the right place at the right time can change everything.
I'm curious, the slingshot, I might have missed this. Is David the only guy that knows how to use it? Or is he the inventor of the slingshot?
No, but it was like a commoner's weapon. It wasn't something like, I'm sure in the army there might have been slingshot eunuchs, but for the most part, it was all geared up. I mean, most people wore armor to battle. So it wouldn't be something that you would just carry on your hip. But he would, being a lunch delivery boy, because when he gets there, he's carrying food to his brothers. So he would have that on him at all times.
He's like that that baseball Disney movie where there's like this teen, he breaks his arm, but somehow when it heals,
Rookie of the year.
Yeah, Rookie of the Year. He can slingshot that baseball really fast.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, I think it's not exactly the type of slingshot that we're thinking of. It's a sling, so it's just a piece of fabric that you put a rock in and then helicopter and release.
Yeah, it's not a wrist rocket where you hold on. We have the Y-shaped stick, and you mount it to your wrist, and you pull the thing back. Yeah, it's very classic slingshot.
Yeah, could have easily been used as a belt as well.
Yeah, that multi-purpose tool. Those things are pretty cool.
It's just funny how. Oh, I was just gonna say, it's just funny how there would be no staying power if he just lost. He takes his armor off, he runs over, and then Goliath just squishes him. Would we hear this story? I doubt it.
I think it would be. Maybe it would be, but it would be in the pagan teachings, maybe.
Maybe.
But no, this battle has some pretty serious political consequences. So David becomes like a rock star, becomes more popular than anyone. And Saul starts to get worried that David might become king of the Israelites. So he starts to go mad. He even went a little mad before this for attacking another ancient tribe that God told him not to attack, but he does it anyways. And so the king becomes vexed at this point. So his paranoia is starting to set in. He's starting to go a little nuts, and he sees David as his competition. So for years, he tries to kill David. And literally David is ran out as exile to the Israelites by the help of one of Saul's sons, ironically enough. And a few times David even has a chance to kill the king, but doesn't. Again, touching on the themes of walking with God, mercy, turn the other cheek, this sort of stuff. And eventually the Philistines back Saul into a corner where he has to fall on his own sword, quite literally, and kill himself. and David becomes the new king of the Israelites. And all this is in what's known as the Book of Samuel, which is one of God's prophets, I guess, call it. And David, before that, was also, well, he was anointed by Samuel. So he was chosen by God to become the next king of the Israelites, no matter what. So you kind of touch on this, again, prophecy thing, and it becomes a weird self-fulfilling prophecy where Saul becomes so obsessed with killing David, or getting back at this, that he neglects his own kingdom or loses sight of ways to keep his kingdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Mad King, right? The tyranny, the degradation to tyranny, for sure. What
I find interesting too, to kind of think of it in like alchemical terms, right? So you have gold, right? And gold's the strong symbol for a king, right? And then you have pyrite. Pyrite, of course, is fool's gold, but it comes from one of the I believe it's sulfite, so I believe it has some interesting like fire type properties, or fire properties based around fire. And it's interesting how, like, we've talked about in the past how fire can be seen as a symbol of envy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how this one event kind of lit the match, or sparked the fuse for David to become king of the Israelites, to set in that envy. So this old king too makes me wonder if it can be like a pyrite can be a symbol of this old corrupted king.
Yeah, definitely. And there seems to be interesting too in old biblical stories that the would-be successor is often a shepherd, which is a pretty on the nose metaphor of a protector of the weak.
Watching over the sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Get into like sheepdog versus wolves and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find kind of cool, so there's I forget which cynical writer writes about it, but I think a certain cynic was writing about Diogenes, and Diogenes was talking about the adaptability of humans. And he talks about sailors in particular, how when the sea gets rough, do they go out and yell at the ocean that it should be calm? Do they start to curse the skies? No, they just kind of adapt, right?
Mm-hmm.
They do things to the ship so that the ship serves better in the storm. Or when it's smooth sailing, they set up the sails and catch the wind to help them go where they're going. So it's the sort of adaptability to the situation that David also does when he throws down that armor, right? He adapts to the situation and overcomes this adversity that seems impossible to overcome for anybody, for any of the Israelites, including the king. And I find that sort of adaptability at the core of what it is to be a human struggling to do anything, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also a good indication of intelligence as well, the ability to problem solve and adapt. So, there's a lot of deep sort of qualities that are rooted in a lot of these hero mythologies. It's it's intelligence, it's caring for the weak, it's being courageous, and yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty important to break them down sometimes, because they're so easy to overlook. I mean, as you were telling the tale, I wrote down like 4 or 5, 6 different things that like you could dovetail off of and have a totally separate conversation about. And that's why I really appreciate sort of deep mythology, because it seems like everything has like a little secret meaning,
a little bit of cult knowledge somewhere in each one.
Oh yeah.
So what's the second thing on that list? The first one was the 40 days, right?
Yeah, and then I just thought I wrote down the Saul being the failed king. That comes up a lot, obviously, too, is that concept of a king, an older king not being able to take care of his kingdom anymore. And that's really just kind of like a mythological interpretation of just life in general. We all sort of get to our peak, and then over time we dwindle and our capabilities lessen. And that's when somebody younger and more competent usually takes the stage.
True. And Saul, interestingly enough, like, so the Israelites asked for a king, or asked Samuel to ask God for a king. And God's like, you're going to really regret this whole king thing. You really should not get a king. But they wanted to kind of nationalize, if you will. And so they end up, picking Saul. And very soon afterwards, he starts disobeying God and then falls out of God's grace. So I wonder too if even the notion of picking a king makes it so that no matter who you pick will eventually become this sort of failed king.
Yeah. Well, and just the concept of human authority over other humans, that's really what religion tries to do. It tries to place the authority above humanity, because too often we understand that humans become corrupted, and they kill a whole bunch of people. So it's better to place your authority in hands that are not human sometimes, I guess.
If you kill all your critics, you've done nothing wrong.
That's right. Yeah, you got no critics.
Yeah, you're doing great.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what you call pathological thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Let's see what else. What else about Saul? I think that wraps up that second point, though. Ayla, do you have anything about failed kings?
No, I think it's just kind of fun to listen to you guys talk about it, because I like mythology, but I don't think I extrapolate some of the deep meaning that it can be used to correlate with other things like today and stuff. But it is funny, they talk about how there's only 7 original stories, like in fiction. But you're right, like this concept of the aging king, you see it in a lot of, current stories, even if it's like fantasies, fiction and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, and I guess that makes sense. That's like a natural progression of things. And I wonder too, like, gosh, like back in the day, if you're living in like a town, right, and there's a king and the king's, things are falling apart, like that's got to be weird, right? Because you can't just like go to another kingdom, or can you? And like then once the invaders come or the king goes away, I mean, like your entire fate is married to that king, and that kingdom, which I think is just like something that gets lost on us sometimes when we read these stories, like to just really take a minute and empathize with like what it would have been like to be sitting there like, oh, this kid's gonna save us. Oh, great. Like what are we gonna do now?
That's what I want, a 13-year-old king.
Right.
Or could you your whole fate, like you don't want to end up in the hands of I guess the enemy's kingdom, like you've heard stories or whatever, and this boy comes around, it's like, yeah, I'll go fight the guy. Well, what are the risks? The whole kingdom's on the line. That's nothing. I got this.
Right. I mean, gosh, it's like, do I refinance my hut, or do I just wait it out? That's got to be really terrible in terms of like planning.
I mean, like, you could just run into the forest and just live out there. Start your own.
Like the people following Merlin. Oh yeah, no, you're different area.
Well, I was thinking Europe for some reason.
Not much running in the desert you want to be doing.
Go behind this other part of the desert. Go next to.
But it is interesting that you guys mentioned the European sort of tie too, because this story reminds me, and it has significant parallels to King Arthur's story, right? It's the boy king. It's like the reluctant, chosen one, the one that's loved by the people. There's a sort of divine intervention for Arthur to be king as well. As I recall, I believe David was a pretty just king. I don't remember him being very corrupt, but that would be in line with Arthur as well. So
and like sort of the weird situation, like like I get a little bit of Hercules' Trials vibe too. So like after David and Goliath, Saul sends David out on all these missions as well that should have killed any other guy, right? But that divine intervention, but because it's David, David can somehow jump through these hoops and survive it all in order to become king. And it's that sort of walking with God sort of thing. And it is like the reluctant commoner. The strongest isn't always the soldier. The strongest isn't always the person who you would typically think it is.
Yeah, which is themes. Yeah, and that's a really good sort of parallel to the concept that brute strength shouldn't be what rules people. It should be wisdom and courage, and I think that's in a time where 2,000 years ago, pardon me, there's probably a lot of violence, and to have this concept of like, oh, so we don't have to have a king that's brutal and kills a whole bunch of people needlessly. We can have like a wise king. That would sounds pretty nice. These are like revolutionary thoughts in humanity. Seriously.
I mean, it's true. Like, of all of the pitfalls that like nepotism brings, I would say it does seem to disincentivize like merit. It's just right. So like if it's just a king after king after king, yeah, I mean, I could imagine.
Which is usually why you need that outsider to come in and restructure the kingship,
the consultant.
Yeah, well, I mean, the consultant or somebody like David or somebody who's adorned by God to come in and be the king to take over.
But someone that doesn't look for that, right? Like
yes,
David,
they're chosen.
Yeah, it's just sort of how fate all plays that stuff out. They're not necessarily looking to be in God's grace, but it's just trying to do what's, either best for themselves is one argument, like, because you can look at this as a tale of luck, right? Like doing the selfish thing, trying to better their life, or look at it as, moving with God, because David even says, like, I think you come at me with a spear and shield, and I come at you with the word of the Lord. So you can look at it as both those sides, but it's that it's that weird sort of fate thing where they're not actually looking for the glory, but just looking to better themselves or the people around them.
Is it like that? That like, is it manifest destiny or? Because you're right. Like you could be born into that position, or you can have like a mystical origin story. And
manifest destiny is something that I will touch upon in a little bit, but I don't think that's the right thing.
There's a different word, like ordained by God, basically, kind of like what Nick was saying. And I think that like
divine right.
Yeah, and one of my favorite movies is I think just Elizabeth, and it's the tale. I believe it's the one with not Kate Winslet, but she was the Witch of the Forest in Lord of the Rings. Kate Blanchett. Yeah. Yes. And what's cool about that movie is you see her. She's a young lady. She becomes the queen, but she's just a queen, right? So this is just like the lineage thing. And then there's a lot of pushback, and throughout the film, she ends up realizing that she can't align with one religious faction or the other. So she's going to become like the virgin queen. So she becomes more than just a blood queen, but she becomes like this ordained, there's some sort of fusion. And I think it's interesting when you think about characters in history, the ones that really stand out, they usually do have something that maybe inspires belief. So I think you were talking a little bit about fate or faith that David had, but I think it's a two-way street. It's the faith that he might have inspired too.
Yeah. No, he definitely inspired a lot of people. Like from killing this one guy, they would say that the Israelites would say Saul has killed thousands, but David has killed tens of thousands. And and they saw him as a complete war hero, like a rock star war hero on top of that. So that sort of inspiration, that divine, or infusing those citizens with that divine inspiration led him to this kind of reluctant role as a king,
Mm-hmm.
which is odd to think about, but it does sort of happen, right? We have someone like George Washington, right, our first president, who's just a general in the Revolutionary War, and then becomes president because he is that sort of warlike hero. And then, ironically, America kind of takes the role of Goliath in the sense, and with the Native Americans being kind of like the David, only it doesn't really work that great for David in those sense, right? So as you were saying earlier, wouldn't it be weird if David runs out there and just throws a stone and it just like bounces off Goliath's just chest armor or something? Goliath kills him. You see that kind of in history more often than not when you look at it from a macro point of view.
Yeah, I think that these types of stories really only serve themselves in mythologies. I don't know how many times. I mean, look, there are definitely a lot of military underdog stories, but the majority of the time, the might makes right. And, I think that that's why it's important for us to have these concepts of like a higher calling, and not high calling because that sounds overly religious, but an understanding that the underdog can win and that we should root for them, and that we should root for somebody who's just and not just ruthless. Because all too often in our physical reality, the most shrewd, ruthless person wins. And, that can be a harsh reality for a lot of people. And so I think psychologically we create these constructs in order to soothe ourselves sometimes.
Well, I mean, it works out for the colonies when they're fighting the Goliath as the British Empire.
Yes, right. Mm-hmm.
But there's that
then you live long enough to become the Goliath.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where I find it gets really interesting. It just might be the general corruption of humans. Like we were talking earlier, that in the real world, maybe David becomes king and then becomes a tyrant, or that's more probabilistically speaking, that's more likely to happen with nation states and governments. As it's not like you can have a George Washington as a president forever. They eventually, right. It's not in our democracy, but eventually the person has to die, unless we find out somehow the ancients lived for hundreds of years, then maybe not. You also see there's some cases, though, isolated cases where it works out. The Seminole tribe down in Florida did pretty well at fighting Americans. We have like the Viet Cong, obviously, fighting Americans. They did pretty decently in that guerrilla type warfare, but there has to be like a technological, at least almost a fair technological playing ground, right?
Yeah, like, the Spartans and the Persians at Thermopylae. Yeah, that's another one.
I mean, it worked out somewhat okay.
Yeah. I mean, they still lost eventually, but yes, that battle they won.
Yeah, for sure. Like when you get to use that land, and that notion of David using a sling, getting that one rock, hitting that. I mean, that's almost the key role for marksmen and snipers now, right? You take out that sort of command structure, you take out the high-ranking people, and then the rest of the army can't really function without, like the snake can't function without a head.
Yeah. And part of me also wonders too, and I didn't actually, I should look into this as well. Part of me wonders if there's a deep root between the sort of like the neo-Judeo beliefs and God being in rivers, because rivers tend to be associated with God a lot as well. And so it's interesting that he took river stones, which tend to be smoothed. And, whereas I'm sure he was in an area where he could have picked up any type of stone, he specifically went to the river and got river stones.
Could be.
and that could be just sort of a metaphor of, you know, time, you know, refining things. So refining the stone until it's a perfect projectile that's totally aerodynamic. You know, the power of water to do that. Yeah, there's a lot there.
And he's used this weapon. He's used a slingshot plenty of times, right? So he would know which stones would work best as a projectile, right? And leading him to those, you know, those smooth stones ends up being the thing that helps it sink into Goliath's head, whereas a jagged stone may have just bounced off.
Yeah, or it couldn't have, and maybe it wouldn't have flown as true. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like the notion of I'm just going to try to hammer this home, I guess. The notion of like rifling, right? You have, again, in the American Revolution, you have muskets, then you have rifled muskets, and they came from, you know, the long rifle. So these people in the Appalachians would have these like giant, huge, long rifled rifles. So the rifling is the engraving inside the barrel that allows a musket ball to spin. Without it, in typical muskets that you would see in like the like more traditional militias and the British regulars, the musket ball actually just bounces around the barrel. So it'd be like throwing a knuckleball in these regular muskets versus throwing a fastball with a spin. So things become more accurate. And maybe just like that smooth stone is more accurate, like a rifled musket round versus a, you know, a jagged rock that comes out more like a knuckleball.
Yeah, and that's, you know, another metaphor, right? That a refined mind is better than a rough one, and, you know, a refined human is victorious over an unpolished human. Yeah.
Why does this feel like an Easter egg hunt? And
It
you
is.
guys are finding all of the like delicious mythological eggs. Like,
Sorry, we're talking too much. Go ahead.
I like that idea though. Like the smooth river rock. I would have never thought about it that way.
Yeah, because these stories seem to be short enough, because, you know, small enough at least, where all these words tend to have a deep meaning, right? So yeah, I think it's like a symbol Easter egg hunt.
It's pretty awesome. Yeah, no, it's kind of fun. Trying to think if there's any. Okay, so what do you guys think about the decapitation of Goliath? Like that seems kind of like overkill or an allusion to Medusa. But I mean, I got nothing on that.
It could be a slaying of a gorgon for sure. You know,
you got to take the head of the monster home, right? Or at least to show to the enemy soldiers. Yeah, it's that trophy of war. It's that trophy of overcoming.
But that's like what serial killers do. They get trophies. Like, so.
Yeah, I mean, war trophies have been around for a long time. It's also interesting that it has been, I don't know if it's said, but I think it's been postulated or suggested that Goliath might have been part of the Nephilim, or at least had some sort of angelic DNA. And I believe this is before the time that, yes.
Wait, sorry. Go back. I thought Nephilim were from like the Dark Crystal. What's the definition?
So the Nephilim were this race of beings that pre the flood. So before Noah's flood, there was a race of beings that had come to being from angels coming down to earth and copulating with humans. And they bore... Angels. Yeah, and they bore all types of different monsters. They were giants, there were monsters, there were all different types of crazy things happening. And eventually God got really pissed off, and he's like, all right, I'm getting rid of all of these things. These are bastardizations. We don't like them, you know, and that's when he sent the flood to wash away all of these like monstrous creatures that the angels had created. But
kind of weird though, because I mean, like I think of an angel... Like how could an angel hybrid be so messed up?
Well, they were fallen aliens. They were fallen angels.
Oh shit. Okay, sorry. I was just thinking like, no, that makes total sense now. Okay, so they were bad creatures.
I mean, they were angels, but they went against God's word and God's decree, and they slept with humans.
And doesn't he like remove all the genitalia from the rest of the angels?
Oh
He's
yeah, yeah,
just- That's
uh-huh.
it, sure.
Yeah.
That or is that just straight out of Dogma? It
That
might
could
be
have been
just
part
straight
of Dogma, but yeah, there's definitely. I do believe that God puts a fatwa on any human and angel fucking after that. So,
Damn.
but David and Goliath happens before Noah's flood, so it is very possible that perhaps Goliath was of that lineage of Nephilim, and
And God
and
was
that
like, take him
and
out.
yep, and that could be why God chose the Israelite side, because the champion of the Philistines was an abomination.
And they're pagans in general, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, too, it could have just been something he'd done after every kill, right? Like he slayed a lion very easily. Could decapitate that lion after slayed a bear, cut it off. And then going back to those war trophies too, yeah, like dog tags are important. I mean, how also too, like there are people that took like SS knives and stuff like that in World War II from dead combatants. So like that's not that uncommon, but I think the symbol is like when you slay the dragon, you cut off its head.
Yeah. Well, it's also having ownership of somebody else's mind. It's that this
Thank you, Nick. That's what
I
I
am
was waiting
so
for.
yeah, I am so powerful that I have slain you, and now I will take the thing that is you, the little house that your brain sits in. I'm going to take that because it's mine now.
Your pumpkin,
Little
if you
house.
Yeah.
That's
and
right.
brain
That
house.
pumpkin episode. Yeah.
will. And like that again, that envy demon being a headless demon. It could just also been some foreshadowing, if you want to take it from a story perspective, where Saul starts to really get jealous of David.
Mm-hmm.
That chopping off of the head could have foreshadowed that envy.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a lot there, that's for sure. That's why these myths have stayed with us for thousands of years. You can dissect them for ever and ever and find something new.
Yeah, and also too, just like showing it to the Philistines is probably what caused that psychological shock.
Mm-hmm.
Like, here's your champion. How mighty is he that a kid could take him out? That's what causes them to run. Like the actual slaying of David doesn't cause them to run. It's the beheading that does it. But so there was that number
So wait,
3? Oh no,
you're
go for it.
saying that the other army, they saw David shoot down this Goliath thing, and then they just stood there, and then they waited for David to cut its head off, and then they were like, ah, and they ran away like Home Alone.
Yeah. And then
So
the
that's kind of
Israelites chased
interesting.
them.
Yeah, but I think that's interesting, right? That there would have been that gap, and then like, because it just makes me
I
think
don't think
again
it
of the
took too
Medusa.
long for him to cut off the head.
And also too, just a moment of shock, right?
Yeah.
Like, here is your champion. For 40 days, this guy's been boasting about how he could beat anybody. And he's your best warrior. He's the best your army can produce. And then he goes down without as much as swinging his sword. Like, just the shock of the moment could have been why they just stood there.
Also, the trembling before God. That's a huge thing. God likes to make people tremble, especially in the Old Testament.
Stop trembling.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a Parks and Recreation joke about Twilight. This lady, she's like, I don't like Twilight. They're always trembling and breathing heavy. It's pretty funny. But I like where you're going with that, Nick, because so Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote a book on David and Goliath, and the subtitle is Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. And one of the things he points out is that David doesn't need social approval, right? Everybody's scared of this Goliath, and he's like, well, I'm gonna go do it, and he doesn't. You're talking about the fearlessness earlier. So I think it's interesting because here you have a character who doesn't need approval of the masses, and then he creates this great achievement. And everybody who did need approval, right, the other side, they fall in line and they run away as a group. Because in actuality, they could have completely murdered him either way. There's a whole army. So I think that there definitely is something to that. Maybe it's like a tiny fable in some way, you know, that like you can either, I don't know.
But
I don't know
David's
what the moral is, but
well, David's victory also proved that God was on the side of the Israelites. And
right.
that was one of the things that made the Philistines turn tail, is because there was a direct sort of, the Philistines were like, we are the most powerful. This is our hero. He is better than anything there is out there. And that's when you have God step in and say, well, he's not more powerful than me. And I'm going to, ordain a little boy to kill you, to show you my power.
It's messed up.
He also, David has the approval of God. Why? If you have the approval of God, why do you need the approval of man?
Right.
So that next where he does not need the approval of the masses, because God looks favorably upon David, because David can carry out or can walk the path that God lays out before him.
Well, and then you get into that, like, yeah, no, never mind. That makes sense.
And if you want to kind of take it, so to use like a Bob Marley quote, a mighty God is a living man. So, living human. So as long as you have faith in yourself, you do not need the approval of the masses to do something. It's that internal sort of pure approval of yourself to do what needs to be done that will carry you through the task versus, turning around and asking others for help. Again, that's where the symbol of dropping that armor becomes so important, because that armor becomes a symbol of your civilization, right? You have to have some sort of advanced civilization at the time to even make armor. So it's the approval of everybody. It's the technology work of everybody around you that creates that. And dropping that kind of shows that you don't need that approval from them, because you have approval in yourself. You have faith in yourself.
Well, and yeah, I think you mentioned too, David says that he is only armed with God's word. What is God's word? Truth.
I was going to say death. No,
yeah. I mean, that is the truth. So it would be part of it. But yeah, that's the concept of, like this. That's where kind of linguistics come into it too. It's like this, God's word is truth and the truth. And so therefore, David is being a vehicle of the truth to show not just the Philistines, but the Israelites that this false idol in front of them vis-a-vis Goliath is not who you should be afraid of or be following.
And then from like the Philistine point of view, because there's morals to be learned there, right? Like, don't take your adversary lightly. Looks are deceiving. And there should be a third one, because all good things come in threes, right?
Brute force isn't what makes a great man.
No. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, Michelangelo's David was not a 14-year-old boy. Like, that's a man. So I'm curious.
How do you know? He's 9 feet tall.
I'm
Ironically,
looking at a picture of the sculpture now. That's a grown man.
He's actually 14 feet tall. So yeah.
Oh, okay. The 14 at least is in there. But yeah, no, it's quite a statue. Sorry, I'm distracted.
Are you just ogling the statue?
Don't stare at his shrinkage like that.
Huh?
I said, don't stare at his shrinkage like that. That's not nice.
The pole was cold.
Yes.
Yeah, seriously.
He's facing his imminent death. Of course he's going to be a little bit, less endowed.
Right. But I think that's an interesting subject to, because if you're a sculptor, you're making something, it's going to take a long time. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, just It's a beautiful work of art, first of all. Just beautiful. Second of all, it is an interesting capture, like you said, of a moment in time. And I just think that, well, like just, there's a quote that's like, I just Googled, David and Goliath images, but it's like David didn't need to know Goliath's strength because he already knew God's. And so it's interesting because, like in the David statue, he's this is before he killed him, right? This isn't after.
It's when he's facing down Goliath. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just an interesting statue. I mean, I'm not sure why he's naked. Was he naked in real life? I don't know. But
it was the pinnacle of macho-ness to fight naked, especially within the sort of the Greco-Italian Roman tradition.
Wait, just like in the artistic representations, or like they were really fighting naked on the battlefield?
Not just that, the Spartans fought naked.
Did they really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was everybody just on the sidelines watching this? Like, okay.
No.
Sorry.
We've become more prudish over time.
Yeah, but it also illustrates that the only armor you need is God.
That's true too.
You don't need Saul's armor.
Yeah, because you don't. Yeah, it seems kind of dumb to me, but at the same time, you're right. Like that's very like. It's almost interesting because I wonder if part of that is the extreme faith needed to go without an armor, but because you have that extra faith, you're rewarded. So like I wonder if that ties into it too.
Yeah, like it will. So that extra faith is you don't need the approval of others, like you were kind of saying. You don't need the gifts of a fellow human if you have gifts from God. And David was not a soldier; he was a shepherd. So why would he need the tools of a soldier when he had the gifts of a shepherd?
Yeah.
But why is a shepherd that like buff? I mean, I'm just curious.
All of them were buff back then because you had to work all day.
That's true.
Remember, he killed a lion with a sword in his beard.
Right.
He had to be a little strong.
That's true. If you see him coming, I bet you could take him pretty easily.
What, a lion?
Just have to aim in the right spot. Sorry, this is really morbid, but I've been hiking a lot more recently, and I think to myself, like, what would I do if a mountain lion attacked me? And I just always think, well, it's just about, well, you would die, or you just go really quick and if you're fighting a mountain lion specifically, they don't have occipital lobes, so you can't just like poke their eyes out and get to their brain. No, you've got to like plan it out. So just be safe when hiking and have a backup plan. But I've had some scenarios where I do fight a mountain lion and I win. It's like a scrappy fight. Big
knife. Are you trying to like knock out a lion? What are you trying to do?
No. Because so I was walking my dog, and we went on this like difficult hike. And so the harder the hike, the fewer people you run into. And we started realizing that we were like really alone. Well, I don't know about we. I realized we were really alone, and I got this like weird vibe. And so then I started thinking like, oh, if something's stalking us, like what would I do? And this is a total tangent, but it's food for thought.
I think it's important for your own safety to figure out a game plan.
Yeah, I need to order one of those like sprays, like they have like those big cat sprays or bear mace and stuff like that, just to be safe.
And just hope that it works.
Yeah, just hope that it works.
Just hope that it works. No, back to the David and Goliath stuff. Yeah, so like David would have that natural strength, right? Because think about how fast you would have to sling that stone around to get that sort of velocity. So it came from the strength from working every day. Again, the gifts that God gives you will always be better than the gift that a fellow human can give you. It's that faith component of the story that's so important. but it's one of the stories, probably the most prolific story in the Bible. One of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely up there.
It's a good one.
How
Yeah.
long is the Bible? Is it really long?
How long is it? It's not a
Just-
movie.
No, I know. No, I've never read it. And like, I know there's a bunch of different versions, but like, I mean, is it a long read?
Depends on the version. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
And I never knew that the Bible was just a bunch of stories. I always thought it was like morals or something like that. But I guess that's the same thing in some way.
It's a bunch of stories with moral underpinnings. And yeah, the different books are written from different messengers of God, I guess you can call them, different Hermes.
Mm.
But Samuel is, I believe the book of Samuel is the longest because it does tell us about Saul and David and the Israelites and all that.
So who's Samuel? Is he one of the three
Samuel.
wise men?
Samuel's one of the messengers from God, or at least the prophet from it. I don't know if he's one of the three wise men though. Let's see.
I don't think so.
This is where the good old Google search comes in.
I know. I like Google. Well, you know, if you go to the Getty Center, not the one that's like the villa, but the actual Getty Center, they do have like some old Bibles on display. And I always thought those were really beautiful because like I feel like a Bible published today, it's kind of cool, but like an old Bible where you can see like the care that went into all of like, maybe it's handwritten or there's some kind of special
Handwritten.
press.
Well,
I don't know, like they just look really pretty is the thing.
I have 4 Bibles in my house, 3 or 4 Bibles. My favorite one is the one my grandfather carried around with him in Puerto Rico. So he was like a missionary-esque thing, but it has like a bunch of handwritten notes in it and whatnot. But
that's pretty cool.
I've picked pieces out of it, but never read it all the way from like front to back.
Yeah,
I've never felt the need to.
Well, I just think it'd be cool. Like, I always wanted to take a theology class back in college because I think one, it would just be really cool to read it cover to cover and just kind of know what's in it. But also too, like I imagine, when you have like a table of contents, like the way it's broken up, there has to be like some significance there too, which would help better understand stories like this.
If you just mapped it out. I mean, there's a lot of natural language work that you could do with it, just from a computational point of view. It's rather interesting. And then, of course, you have different professors, different speakers, both in and out of theology, doing their own analysis of the stories and kind of tying it together or tying it to like modern day stuff. Even just like with this talk, we sort of tied it to some military history, right? This underdog tale sort of stuff and how it usually plays out, because it is a military story at a sort of the root of it, so it's sort of important. And then even tracing through some of the technology lines through it, the sort of out of box guerrilla warfare style, and the ancient history of projectile weapons, starting from the slingshot, then that moves to the bow and arrow, then that moves to the musket or anything gunpowder based, and moves to now what we use today.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, they're extremely, that book is extremely useful for many different things outside, both in and out of self-development. So there's 3 wise men: Melchior, Maguire, Caspar, and Balthazar are the names.
It's not Sam. No,
Samuel,
now I'm thinking Samwise Genji.
So Samuel was the guy that talked to God for the Israelites.
Oh.
So he was the one, they wanted a king, so they asked Samuel to ask God for a king. God's like, you don't want a king. It's going to be bad. It's going to end up bad. And the Israelites didn't care and picked Saul as their king. And then God later anoints David to become king. I don't know why God has a thing for shepherds, but he does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, outside of the likelihood that it was one of the more common occupations in that time and era or that area. But it's also, the flock. He is the lamb. Jesus being the lamb. Taking care of something that is fragile and needs your attention. It's a sort of just a higher sort of quality that is something that we find admirable as humans, caretakers.
But it also implies that like people are sheep, or at least I guess
People are sheep, but
uninitiated.
not in the modern sense that you're talking about. People are sheep in the sense that the sheep are the innocent. They're the people. They're God's people, and God called them His flock. So a shepherd would be somebody who minds God's flock.
The leader, basically.
Yeah, leader, caretaker.
Caretaker.
Yeah,
Because I would imagine even sheep have hierarchies, so there might be a leader.
yeah.
Is a single sheep a sheep?
I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing. Judging from the sheep herders I know on the Navajo res, we need some fitter shepherds if they're gonna adhere to this David archetype. No, they're always usually like they just hang out with the sheep. They don't really do that much.
Well, I mean, metaphorically speaking, what is a shepherd? Isn't the aesthetic class supposed to be the shepherd? But what's the aesthetic class?
No, the aesthetic class. I think the shepherd. It really just comes from this concept that God's chosen people are the common people, the working people. It's this concept because even in the Bible there's this distinction God makes, and even Jesus, he makes this distinction about the commoners, how they are closer to God. I mean, there's that famous line. It would be easier to put it to pass it. Yeah, right.
To get into heaven.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So
Say that one more time.
It's easier to pass a camel through an eye of a needle than it is for the rich to get into heaven.
Oh, I didn't hear that quote. That's good to. Well, okay then. Glad I'm not rich. That was good. Knock on wood though, because I wouldn't mind it.
More money, more problems. Let me tell you.
Right. No, you just become Mindy St. Clair and go to like the middle place.
Another obscure reference.
I know. The Good Place is a TV show people should watch. It's good stuff.
I'll say the same thing the last time you brought it up. But is it really the good place?
I can't confirm nor deny.
You're not at liberty to disclose that information.
Dude, do you know how much heat I got for spoiling a Jon Snow moment during active Game of Thrones seasonality? It was rough.
Okay.
Oh, you said you were going to draw some Game of Thrones connections to the story. Do you still see any Game of Thrones connections to the story?
Oh, no, I was just talking about, you mentioned earlier the mountain. Just this big guy. I was just saying it made me think of the mountain. It's pretty funny.
Who kills the mountain? I mean, it's Game of Thrones, so everybody dies.
And true, but I'm not going to spoil it because there's still people who haven't seen it, and I don't want to be that person. Or I guess huh?
Are you serious?
I don't know. I don't know what the ethics are here.
For 3 years.
I haven't seen it, and I'm asking you.
But like that, like you don't find out until the very last.
Is the Hound a David-like figure?
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of.
He shepherds the Stark girls all over the place. He tries to be, and then he does become friends with that shepherd guy or that like cult, that group of nice people. I mean, like I want to say cult, but but they had like a vibe, but they were happy.
Like a
until
good
they
vibe?
No, just It's hard to talk about Game of Thrones if you don't know. I can't use the reference. It's really complicated. You should just watch it, and then we'll have an episode.
Yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely cannot. But no, I think so. Nick, we worked through like 3 or 4 points.
Yeah, I mean, I had a few more, but we already kind of talked about them. The concept of the stones, the projectile, and then the King Arthur connection.
Nice.
Yeah. So I think, got to all of my little points there.
Cool.
Little points.
Ayla, any sort of little points you got?
No,
outside of
I mean,
gawking at statues.
yeah, I mean, I'd like to hear more women in this story, but
Oh, here we go.
we do.
I mean, it is the Bible. Just saying.
Yeah. Why weren't there any women in the military?
Fighting naked.
Yeah, totally.
Could you imagine
that you know of from history?
Wait. Are Amazonians, is that strictly a Marvel thing, or are there Amazons in the Bible?
No, there aren't. All right.
It's a mythical sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, we're getting way off track. I'm gonna have to do some research. But no, I mean, I'm good on this. It's a cool story, Mike.
Yeah. No, I guess that's it then.
Awesome. Yeah, well, that's a fun conversation. A nice little, I mean, like you can talk about all of the different stuff, and I think we covered a lot of really interesting points there. So thanks, Mike, for bringing that to our table. And thank you all so much for listening. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. I certainly did. If you have any thoughts that you wanted to share with us, please leave us comments, or you can give us a thumbs up on our Facebook page and our YouTube page, and perhaps a subscription. That would really help us out. But other than that, we very much appreciate you taking the time to listen tonight, or any other time that you're listening. Until next time, Cognonauts, you stay out there, and we'll catch you on the next Exofathom. Good night.
Peace.
Later.